the Egyptian campaign, and the plan for the Indian campaign. Napoleon Bonaparte's two most foolish ventures? Could a great military leader and politician make reckless and pointless decisions? Let's imagine for a moment that you are a soldier in the French army in 1799 in Egypt. General Bonaparte brought you here. The sun is merciless. Blood cracks on your lips. Your heart is pounding, and there are black circles in your eyes, accompanied by a terrible headache. These are the effects of heat stroke and dehydration. Today, you were ordered to march 10 kilometers through the desert to cover the flank of General Kleber's division so that the Mamluks wouldn't outflank it. You didn't reach the assigned position before sunrise, and you had to march almost until noon. The folds of your European uniform, totally unsuited for this hot climate, hindered your movement, and the heavy felt hat caused sweat to pour into your eyes. But now, as an old soldier who could easily approach the future first consul, you ask, "Sir, what are we doing in this damned Egypt, where there's nothing but sand, sun, scorpions, and poor fellahin, the Egyptian peasants?" To your amazement, the first consul cannot provide a coherent answer. He speaks of coming here for glory, repeating the words he said before the Battle of the Pyramids, about how 40 centuries of history are looking down on us from the tops of the pyramids, and similar sentiments. But you still cannot understand why your friend Henri Duval, whom you buried yesterday in the sands of the Sinai Desert, had to die of exhaustion and dysentery. By taking almost 200 scientists on the expedition, Napoleon wanted to give his senseless and reckless campaign the appearance of scientific and economic necessity for France's possession of Egypt. But, as he later confessed to Lannes, then not yet a marshal, he was drawn to the east by the glory of ancient heroes. Agree, the desire to fight in the same places where Alexander the Great and the Romans fought is a weak justification for a campaign that lacked proper preparation, support, and, most importantly, objectives. All decisions were made as events unfolded, and then there was the British Navy. Everyone who knew anything about naval matters warned Napoleon about the possibility of the British fleet blockading the French army in Egypt. They told him that returning the army to France, once the British established a blockade, would be extremely difficult. But what do 40,000 soldiers' lives mean to an ambitious Corsican striving for ancient glory? As for the official goals announced by the convention, France's government at the time, 200 years ago, that occupying Egypt was necessary, and that Egypt would serve as a springboard for an advance into British India, England's most valuable colony, these do not withstand any criticism. The French lacked the resources and means in 1798 for either objective. And if you consider that the distance from the Nile to India is 4,500 kilometers, with deserts, impassable mountains, and hundreds of rivers to cross, that the state of the French Navy was, to put it mildly, unsatisfactory, and that there was no one to supply the French army, such plans look simply foolish. Moreover, such an operation would inevitably lead to food requisitions, essentially looting the populations of the territories the French would pass through, resulting in relentless and brutal guerrilla warfare. Military operations in Europe were not even close to ending. In Italy, Massena, Austrians, and Russians under Suvorov were at each other's throats. There were not enough soldiers. We know the outcome of this campaign. Napoleon's name echoed across Europe, Egyptian trinkets came into fashion, and Champollion would decipher the Rosetta Stone. For this, 20,000 Frenchmen remained forever in the scorching sands. As for the living, Napoleon simply abandoned them in Egypt, not waiting for the tragic end. However, if this senseless adventure can be explained by the fact that France's corrupt government wanted to rid itself of the young General Bonaparte, a man with boundless ambitions and a long sword, then Napoleon's planned campaign to India, jointly with the Russians in 1801, can only be called madness. This was when Napoleon was already effectively ruling France without opposition. Here's why. First, Napoleon's ally in the campaign against India was supposed to be the Russians, specifically their emperor, Paul I. Those who knew Paul well said he was an enthusiastic dreamer whose plans were unrealistic. For example, on the eve of the joint campaign with the French, 22,000 Cossacks were sent to scout the routes to India. To cover a 1,000-kilometer journey through wild and harsh terrain, all they were given was a primitive map for their commander, Count Orlov. No arrangements were made for the supply of food or gunpowder, nor were any preliminary agreements reached with the brutal eastern feudal lords of those lands. The Cossacks covered only a small part of the route, but they recalled it with horror. They were saved from certain death in this campaign only because the new Russian emperor, Alexander, canceled his father's reckless order. And these were the Cossacks, people used to hardships and deprivations unlike any European soldier of that time. Again, Napoleon planned to cover the distance to Delhi in a maximum of 150 days. A simple analysis of the Cossack raid, where they covered 300 kilometers in 2 months, showed that this journey, even under the most favorable circumstances, would take 250 days. The human losses due to lack of water, food, and the harsh, unfamiliar climate on the way to India would exceed a quarter of the total troops. Napoleon's analogies with Alexander the Great were misplaced. All circumstances without exception had changed since then. Everything was different. Adding to this, Britain would have fought for the jewel of its colonies, India, more fiercely than ever. But Emperor Paul was killed by his own Russian officers, and the campaign plan remained on paper. Marshal Massena, who was supposed to lead the campaign, never got the chance to loot the treasures of the great Mughals. Looting was something he knew and loved. But nearly all the French soldiers, who should have thanked the Virgin Mary for their miraculous salvation from death in this campaign, perished in the subsequent years of the endless Napoleonic Wars. Let's try to draw a conclusion for which Napoleon's admirers may curse us. One of the most famous people on the planet today, undoubtedly a military genius, was a damnably self-absorbed cynic for whom abstract glory and his own arrogant pride were worth more than the lives of hundreds of thousands of Frenchmen, not to mention the people of other nations.